The resistance pocket situated northeast of Anhai had not been fully neutralized. It had merely been cut off, and Bismarck mistakenly assumed it had already been captured rather than simply surrounded. As a result, he planned to dispatch an assault company around the northern side of Anhai to secure an exit toward the west. In my judgment, this operation, like the earlier action carried out near Godesberg, would prove highly important for the next stage of the campaign. Accordingly, 5 tanks were assigned under Bismarck's command to support the infantry attack advancing through the forest west of Anhai. My own intention was to position the Panzer Regiment inside a wooded area roughly 1,000 yards north of Anhai, and then concentrate the remaining forces at that point, from which they could be rapidly employed either northward, northwestward, or westward, depending on how events unfolded. I moved personally into the forest from both flanks of the wooded sector to assemble Rothenberg's tanks. I took position in a Panzer III that followed directly behind him. Rothenberg advanced through a shallow depression to the left, accompanied by the 5 tanks assigned to support the infantry, thereby leading approximately 100 yards ahead. There was no sign of enemy resistance. Around 20 to 30 tanks trailed behind. When the column reached the tree line at the southern edge of the forest near Anhai, Colonel Rothenberg shifted with his lead tanks toward the southwest boundary of the woods and prepared to cross a low field. From that position, we could observe the 5 infantry support tanks below us, and off to our left front, when, without warning, intense artillery and anti-tank fire erupted from the west. Shells exploded all around us, and my own tank suffered 2 direct hits in quick succession. The first struck the upper edge of the turret, and the second impacted the periscope. The driver immediately accelerated and steered the vehicle toward the nearest cover. After only a short distance, however, we reached the western edge of the woods, where the tank slid down a steep incline before finally becoming immobilized in open ground, directly exposed to the enemy. The location was dangerous because any movement at the forest edge could easily be observed. I had been struck in the right cheek by fragments from a shell that damaged the periscope. Although painful, the wound was not especially severe and bled only lightly. The enemy then directed sustained fire from a 37mm gun at the side of our tank facing the opposite woodland. But because of the heavy angle of the armor, the vehicle remained intact. French batteries now concentrated their fire on the forest itself, and at any moment we expected them to target our fully exposed tank. I therefore decided to abandon it as quickly as possible and take shelter among the trees. At that moment, the junior officer commanding the tanks assigned to escort the infantry reported himself badly wounded, saying, "Herr General, my left arm has been shattered." We climbed uphill through soft sand while shells burst and fragments flew around us. Close in front of us, Rothenberg's tank rolled past engulfed in flames. The adjutant of the Panzer Regiment had also abandoned his vehicle. I believed at first that the commander himself had already escaped because both his cigarette case and his walking stick remained behind. Later, however, it became apparent that only the smoke candles had ignited, and the smoke now drifting from the vehicle was serving as an effective screen. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Most had driven my armored signals car into the woods, though it had also been struck by enemy fire and rendered immobile. The crew escaped unharmed. I then ordered our tanks to push through the woods in a broad easterly movement, though the armored cars under my command could not keep pace. Slowly, Rothenberg's command tank forced its way between the trees, breaking many of them as it advanced. Only the accidental smoke screen produced by this tank prevented the enemy from firing accurately on our vehicles. Had the French concentrated machine gun and 37mm fire on the exposed tanks at the edge of the forest during our movement, they likely would have destroyed many of the vehicles and inflicted serious losses. Instead, the evening attack launched by the 25th Panzer Regiment succeeded, and we managed to occupy assembly areas east of the Meuse. A major factor in the success of the operation was the division's flexibility in adapting to changing conditions. This was made possible because the divisional commander kept his signal troops constantly moving and was able to communicate directly with regimental commanders on the forward line. Wireless communication alone, because of the need for encoding, would have delayed the process too long, since reports first had to be transmitted back to division headquarters before fresh orders could return to the front. The division's operations staff, which remained near the front and maintained continuous contact with frontline units, also played a decisive role. Each morning and afternoon, the divisional commander and his operations officer held direct conferences. This method of command proved highly effective. Through its advance that day, Rommel created a significant breach whose consequences, particularly its effect on the morale of the French High Command, were immense. 3 separate crossings of the Meuse had already been achieved on the 13th, with another underway on the 14th. During the afternoon, the leading troops of Reinhardt's Panzer Corps succeeded in crossing at Monthermé, and Guderian's forces reached Sedan. Reinhardt's troops had gained only a narrow foothold and faced fierce resistance in maintaining it. Not until the 15th were they able to construct a bridge over the river, and by then the exit from the area had become possible. From Monthermé farther south, heavy rainfall caused flooding severe enough to obstruct Guderian's troops more seriously, though one of his 3 divisions succeeded in securing a foothold, and by daybreak on the 14th, completed construction of a bridge. The bridge narrowly escaped destruction despite repeated Allied air attacks. Guderian's units had established strong anti-aircraft defenses around the crossing points, and concentrated fire from roughly 50 guns brought down an estimated 150 French and British aircraft, seriously weakening the bombing effort. By the afternoon, all 3 of Guderian's panzer divisions had crossed the river. Holding off determined counterattacks from the south, he turned westward to join forces with the French 2nd and 9th Armies, which had already begun retreating towards safer positions. That same night, the commander of the French 9th Army made a disastrous decision. Under pressure from Guderian's advance threatening his right flank, and from Rommel's penetration through the center of the front, reports claimed that thousands of tanks were pouring through the breach. Orders were issued to abandon the Meuse line and withdraw the 9th Army farther west. On Rommel's front, his original objective had been to follow the railway east of Philippeville, approximately 15 miles behind the Meuse. Rommel's forces broke through there the next morning, the 15th, before the position could be organized, and under the pressure of his attack, the withdrawal quickly became a general collapse. His renewed thrust also compelled an intended counterattack by the French 1st Armored Division and 4th North African Division, which had only recently arrived. The former division reached Rommel's right flank but ran out of fuel in the midst of battle, and could do little more than observe his advance passing its front while remaining immobilized. Many of its tanks were destroyed before they could disengage. Meanwhile, the North African Division was overwhelmed by the Panzer assault and the dive bombers supporting it. Farther west, Corrap's general withdrawal order had accidentally exposed the bottleneck at Monthermé, where the right wing of the 9th Army had previously blocked Reinhardt's Panzer Corps. Once retreat began, the area descended into confusion, and Reinhardt's leading troops were able to slip around the exposed flank of the 9th Army, beyond the zone reached by Guderian, and then push westward many miles along open roads. By evening, Guderian had also forced the final French defenses back and broken through into open country. The front line extending 60 miles west of the Meuse had effectively collapsed. The importance of Rommel's actions on 15th of May becomes clearer when considered within this broader context. My intention for 15th of May was to drive directly through in a single rapid thrust toward our objective, supported by the 25th Panzer Regiment in the lead and with artillery and, if possible, dive bomber support. The infantry was to follow the tanks, partly mounted and partly advancing by horse transport. To my mind, the critical factor was ensuring that artillery fire screened both flanks of the advance, since neighboring divisions were still some distance behind us. The route selected for the 25th Panzer Regiment, marked on the map, curved around the outskirts of Philippeville, approximately 18 miles west of Dinant, to avoid villages and open terrain that could expose the force to enemy artillery fire from Philippeville. My intention was to ride with the regiment so that I could direct the attack from the front and maintained contact with both the artillery and dive bombers at decisive moments. To simplify communications, which were often delayed by the need for wireless encoding, I established what I described as a line of trust with the operations officer and artillery commander. Starting points for this line were taken from road intersections and finishing points from prominent landmarks such as churches or major map features. If I needed artillery support near Philippeville, for example, I could simply radio, "Heavy artillery fire immediately around point 11." The artillery commander approved enthusiastically of the arrangement. At approximately 900 hours, I was informed by a Luftwaffe major that dive bombers would be available to support my division that day. Since the tanks were already moving toward the objective, I climbed into a tank and drove to the attack. I then proceeded to Rothenburg's tank and instructed Gefechtsstaffel to follow the attack closely from cover, while maintaining contact through armored cars and signal vehicles. After a brief engagement with enemy tanks near Flavian, the Panzer Regiment advanced in column through the woods toward Philippeville, passing many abandoned guns and vehicles belonging to French forces whose morale had likely already been shattered by our air attacks. Huge shell craters forced several detours through the forest. Around 3 miles northwest of Philippeville, our forces exchanged fire briefly with French troops occupying hills and woods south of the town. Our tanks advanced with turrets trained left while the enemy was rapidly silenced. From time to time, anti-tank guns, tanks, and armored cars appeared and were quickly destroyed by artillery or overrun. Staff and artillery commanders remained closely informed through messages sent by motorcycle dispatch riders, and the artillery coordination system functioned effectively. The day's objective was soon achieved, with one of Rothenburg's panzer companies positioned under my direct command. I then drove back over the tracks of the advance to re-establish contact with the infantry moving behind us. On high ground, roughly 1,000 yards west of Philippeville, we encountered 2 of our tanks disabled by mechanical failures. Their crews were occupied gathering prisoners, and several dead horses already lay nearby. Soon afterward, French motorcycle units emerged from the woods, and together with their riders, quickly surrendered to Rommel's troops.